Hello and welcome to Inflection Point Conversations. I'm Michelle Obaida, an art director and 3D artist. In this podcast series, I'll be interviewing experts in the fields of art, architecture, and visualization. Together, we will take a deep dive into the disruptive topics that have reached an inflection point in our industry. If you're enjoying this podcast, please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe. You can also comment and give feedback. I'd love to reach more people and grow this amazing community. Today, I'm talking with Niall Patrick Walsh. Niall is an architect and writer based in Belfast, Northern Ireland. A former senior editor at Arc Daily, Niall is currently a contributing writer at Archinect, where he led their Archinect In-Depth artificial intelligence series. His writing and research revolve around architecture's intersection with new technologies, labour issues, and policyscapes. Niall is also an independent licensed architect in Ireland and the UK, having formerly worked as an architect at BDP. Welcome, Niall.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks for coming on the podcast. It's great to have you here. I know we spoke previously earlier last year on the panel discussion about AI in architecture.
Yeah.
And that was great. And I felt like I had so many follow-up questions. I really wanted to get you on and to talk you through. I mean, now it's been how many months? 9, 10 months, maybe 8 months.
Since the discussion?
Yeah.
Yeah, about that, wasn't it? That's terrifying because there are still projects that I was working on back during that discussion that I am still working on now that I'm
Still doing.
So I always hate being reminded about how quickly time passes. But yeah, no, that was a great discussion at a very timely moment. And yeah, part of me wishes I kind of listened back again just to hear about how maybe things have changed or how they've stayed the same. But no, it was it was a great talk.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like particularly the talk of AI, because this podcast started in the subject of AI, and then we've taken it to be I've taken it to be about different topics that are, disruptive at the moment or on people's minds and stuff like that. And so it's interesting to see how AI keeps dipping up and down. So before it seemed like, oh, people aren't talking about it anymore. And then now people are talking about it more, and so this is an interesting sort of underlying question that like everyone's talking about now, which is crazy. So it's funny to hear back, and it seemed a little bit dated and now it seems pertinent again. Just
yeah, that is the kind of the story of AI for decades. It was coined back in the 50s. There was a surge of interest in the idea of machines doing human labor, all the way through the through the 60s and 70s. AI traditionally had a lot of funding from government, usually from the military, and it kind of goes through these hype cycles where I can't remember the phrase. It's like AI, it under delivers in the short term and over delivers in the long term. Usually what people will have so much expectation of the technology, a huge amount of money will go into it, and then they'll come up against some kind of block. Usually it actually has to do with physical computing, just can't keep up with the aspirations. And then that leads to a dip, and it leads to a loss of confidence, and those are so-called AI winters. People want to know about that. There's a brilliant author, Molly Wright Steenson, who has written a whole book called Architectural Intelligence. She talks a bit about that. She talks about the kind of peaks and troughs of AI. I mean, a lot of subjects are like that. They're hype driven. Hype attracts money. Money attracts innovation. The innovation comes up against a block that takes all the hype away, takes all the money away, and that's just it's up and down. It's like the economy. But yeah, we're definitely going through a more sustained hype, and I think more of a hype that it's a lot more consequential because we have the internet now. Everyone has immediate access to AI tools in a way that they didn't in the 80s, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I feel like it's affecting a lot more jobs suddenly. We'll get into that for sure. I wanted to just go back to you and ask you what got you interested in architecture. How did you get into it?
Sure. I think my journey through architecture is kind of typical and cliched, I think, where it started off when I was very, very young. maybe, I don't know, 5 onwards, being obsessed with Lego. Usually it's either Lego or Meccano. Those are the two things that every like 30 plus year old architect says today. That's what got them started.
Mhm.
One's younger than it's probably gonna be like The Sims or something. But I
I
remember,
was going to say Lego.
yeah, yeah. I remember being very, very young, spending hours in my room building Lego, and then eventually, because you run into the issue that every kid has, where you run out of Lego, you run out of building blocks, and I kind of found as time went on, I was more interested in sketching out what I wanted to design than I was actually building it, because usually it was just hopeless. What I would design would be so hopelessly aspirational compared to what I actually was able to deliver, which is really funny because that is also the experience of most architects today. So I was kind of like value engineering as like a 6 year old. Um, but yeah, that passion for design and getting things on paper was there from an early age. And then I think going through my, say, my preteens, teenage years, I started watching a lot of documentaries about building design, mega structures, and that's what started to evoke this interest in being able to shape the environment. Being was very aware that you can these things could emerge from your head, manifest in the real world, and have consequences for decades, which is fascinating to me. And there's not a
Yeah.
lot of um, not every job you get to do that, or you get to engage with that. There's a famous quote, and it's usually attributed to George Bernard Shaw. I don't know if he was the first person to say it, because
Mhm.
Kennedy has said it. Well, obviously Shaw would have said it before Kennedy, but a lot of people have said it. It's like, some people look at the world as it is and ask why. Others look at the world that could be and ask why not.
Mhm.
And I always find that architecture is one of those disciplines that allows you to kind of ask both questions. You're allowed
Mhm.
to look at the world as it is and internalize it and respond to it, and then you're allowed to imagine something new. And I was always very conscious that uh, architecture gives you license to explore an almost unlimited amount of other topics. You can explore psychology, you can
Mhm.
explore materials, you can explore history and politics and art, and you're never told to like stay in your lane, or no one ever says to you, why are you're an architect, why are you asking about this? It just gives you license and permission to explore a wide variety of topics. And I think that is, even from being a kid, that always suited me, because I am definitely a lot better at kind of gaining a working knowledge of a massive amount of topics than I am zoning in very, very deep on one particular topic. I'm not as good as that. I tend to get bored or lost in the weeds.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm very good at being kind of at finding something interesting in a broad range of things. I think architecture
Yeah.
just kind of drew me for that reason.
That's really true, actually. I feel like I'm quite similar in that way. And architecture was quite broad. I did a
Mm.
degree, just like part one, and then went off into the art side of it. But yeah, you're a licensed architect, so you must have done
Mhm.
part three.
Yep.
And then you were working in practice before you got into publishing, so you got into the writing side of it later on.
No, they've always kind of worked in tandem. I mean, the story of my interest in architecture is very similar to the story of my interest in writing. It just goes back to a very early age. I mean, I was always big into reading. My parents always and school teachers always like instilled the importance of reading even as a young kid. Um, I never had contemplated, I think, the idea of writing as a job or as a career. It was never purposely planned to be part of my career,
Hmm.
for most of my childhood and most of my kind of school years. That did start to change when I was about maybe 17 or 18. I was coming into, I guess in the UK it would be A levels. I was doing the Irish equivalent.
Hmm.
I just happened to have a really good succession of English and history teachers, and who did what all good teachers do, which is they instill a passion in their subject, and they also give you confidence in your ability in that subject.
Yeah.
So I almost faced this kind of um, a quandary or a dilemma, you might say an inflection point, When I was deciding what to study in university. I was like, do I want to do history and politics and try to find some way of weaving architecture into that, or do I want to study architecture and find a way of weaving writing and issues beyond architecture into that? And I chose the latter. I chose to study architecture. It's much more specialist training, I think, required in architecture than in writing. So I said, okay, I'll do architecture, and if writing comes into it, it comes into it. I'm pretty glad with that decision.
Yeah.
And then I think the story of my career since then has been this kind of constant balancing act between design and writing. So to your question, which was did the writing come after the architecture? They've always kind of been in like a
Gone
dance with
hand
each
in
other.
hand.
So you might know this after you do the part one in the UK. Before you do your masters, you work in practice for a year or for 2 years. But while I was working in practice, I started doing an internship with Arc Daily.
Mm.
That's why I just applied for it just because I thought it would be fun to do. I knew that it wasn't my central career, so I said, "Oh, I'll go for this," and I got it. And then when I was back in my masters, I joined Arc Daily's editorial team pretty much as like a part-time job. And then after my masters, when I was working in BDP, an architecture firm, I worked there for about three years after graduating, and that's how I got my license. While I was working with them, I decided to start again just writing part time in the evenings for Archinect and for other journals. So I've never had to choose between the two of them. I've always found a way to just
Yeah.
balance them, and they've always
That's
fed
great.
off each other. I don't think I don't think that's going to change. I've kind of accepted. I mean, I'm nearly 30 now. I've kind of accepted. I'm just going to have these two careers, and they're going to keep bouncing off each other. At some point, one will support the other. At other times, the other.
Yeah.
It's the inverse. Writing supports architecture, and sometimes design supports writing, and that's just the way it is. It's worked well for 10 years. So I don't know, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you start writing about when you were doing internship and when you graduated?
Mm.
What kind of articles were they? Opinion pieces or
Oh no, no, these were just news pieces. I shouldn't say just news pieces. A lot of people, a lot of people make a good living just doing news pieces, but these weren't pieces that required me to do a huge amount of research by myself. I was just basically writing news reports like what you might see on the BBC or CNN
Mhm.
every day. Reporting on new buildings that were being built or new projects which were in the works. Um, that was most of my internship because as an intern, you don't really get more responsibility than that because you haven't been doing it for that long.
Yeah.
By the time as it progressed, I started to kind of find my own voice a bit more. I started zoning in on issues which were interesting to me. Usually, they were actually informed by what I was studying in my master's. So I'd be studying a lot about, say, food production or blockchain or anything to do with politics and later on to do with labor issues. These were all things that I was just looking at in university and that I was
Hmm.
observing in practice. So and that's what kind of came through in my writing. And now with Archinect, it's a lot of my responsibility now is feature articles where I kind of choose my own pieces.
Hmm.
So that can be AI. I mean, people can look up what I've written about it. It's usually technology or it's labor or it's politics or it's the business, the ethics of architecture. Because those are things which are interesting to me. So yeah, it's evolved over time.
Yeah. And you've been doing interviews.
Mm,
Have they just been with this series, or I guess you've done? I've read quite a few different interviews that you've
mm.
done. Do you enjoy the interview aspect
Oh
of
yeah,
it?
definitely. I think the interview is my favorite part of the whole job. So yeah, you're right. The AI series we did with Archinect was a lot of interviews. I think I've interviewed about 35 people
Mm.
about AI. But even before that, interviews were an important part of my feature writing. I was always conscious that I just have one view, and no matter how impartial I try to be, it is worth trying to get other other voices and other perspectives. Usually people who are, whatever topic I'm writing about, will inevitably know more than me. These people have written books, or they've talked the talk and walked the walk. Um, so it's always vital for me to get outside voices. So yeah, so the interviews are something that even at Arc Daily, I think was when I started interviewing people. I interviewed Carlo Ratti, and a few others who've kind of been recurring guests, I guess. But yeah, no, I'd say, yeah, the interviews are definitely one of the more interesting parts of the job.
Yeah. What are some of your most interesting ones? Can you tell me any that
Mm.
stand out?
I think the ones I kind of cherish the most, there's a guy called Richard Saul Wurman, who a lot of people don't know, but he's the founder of TED, TED Talks.
Mm-hmm.
So he founded TED back in 1976, I think. And he's an architect. He's almost 90 years old. He studied architecture back in the 1950s in, I think, University of Pennsylvania. He worked for Louis Kahn. When he was my age, he was working for Louis Kahn. And he was good
Cool.
friends with Louis Kahn. And he knows Frank Gehry really well. He knows Moshe Safdie. Um, he once saw Frank Lloyd Wright, but was too shy to introduce himself to him. This was back when he was like my age. I think he said he saw him in a hallway in the 1950s, which is really funny. Um,
It's a
he's
cute detail
fascinating.
as well.
Yeah, yeah, he's fascinating because he's someone who, uh, again, trained as an architect, but has moved beyond the traditional role and the traditional 9 to 5 of being an architect. So I kind of identify with that a fair bit. And I need to be very careful when I say I identify with it. I definitely don't emulate it because I'm nowhere near the level of success that he has. But yeah,
Not yet.
he's a fascinating guy to talk to. I've spoken to him now about 4 or 5 times, always over 2 or 3 hours per conversation.
Wow.
And you just kind of get lost in them. He has done a lot for my style of talking and interviewing. I
Mm-hmm.
don't depend as much on um I mean, maybe you've seen this with interviewing people. It's very easy to be thinking about the next question while the person's talking, and you kind
Yes.
of miss. And I totally get that. I'm very much like that because I'm always afraid of silence, of like, and it's happened to me before as well, where I'm interviewing somebody. You kind of get lost in thought about what they're saying, and then when they stop talking, you just don't know what the hell to say. So you're thinking about the next question. He's been very good at just forcing me to just kind of trust my instincts, just to talk, and
Nice.
just trust that it comes out well. So that's been great. People should definitely. I have another interview in the works with him. Two pieces actually due to publish in the next couple of weeks. So he's definitely somebody who has been informative for me. At the total other end of the scale, then another person that comes to mind is a designer called Behnaz Farahi. So she's
Mm-hmm.
an Iranian American architect, lecturer, fashion designer. And I got talking to her during the AI series. I think she was the first interview we published. I think she was. If not, she was one of the first two. She, I think, is a very instructive person for young architects. She's young herself. She's still in her 30s, I think. So she has a
Mm-hmm.
lot to go. But I think the way she approaches her work is very instructive for younger designers, people coming out of university, just starting in practice. Not so much people who are working for an employer in practice. They don't have a massive amount of control over what they do, but people who are trying to do things in their spare time. I think we definitely live in a kind of an on-demand culture where there's just constant pressure to produce, whether that's a
Mm-hmm.
new podcast or a new artwork or a new project or a new YouTube video or a new article, and trying to keep going and going and going. Whether she, from what I can tell, will spend a full year on a project, and she'll publish
Interesting.
one project per year, which at the start probably felt very, very slow and not a lot of output for the input. But she's been doing that for 10 years. And when you go and look at her website now, it's the most unbelievable collection of work. It's
She's
really
an
in depth.
architect,
She's an
as in
architect, yeah.
one project.
Uh,
Yeah.
no, when I say I'm not talking about built. I'm not talking about buildings. So she's an architect and she's also a fashion designer. So a lot
Got
of
it.
her a lot of her projects are garments and exhibitions and installations, usually merging fashion with computation. They're like they're these fabrics that kind of respond to their environment. But there's a lot of heavy theory about feminism, about culture, about surveillance. That's merged with really cutting edge technology in the garments, which is combined with materials science, which is combined with, just from a design point of view, unbelievably beautiful work. So that's
Wow.
all in one project, and she's able to accomplish that because she takes her time. She doesn't take her time in the sense that she doesn't work quickly. She probably works extremely quickly, but she packs a lot into one project. Whereas I suspect other people trying to do the same thing would be publishing bits every day or every week or every month. Whether she puts it all into one project, and it can it can seem probably slow at the beginning, but it's that thing about, it pays off over time. So I think it's definitely worth people paying attention to that. Go and look at her work. That's, again, it just shows you the value of of letting projects breathe and being confident
Yeah,
about. I was trying to think of what the term was. It's quality over quantity. That's
you're
the
right.
phrase I was thinking for.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I definitely want to look her up.
Mm,
We were talking about um the study between part one and part two. I went to work for a fashion designer. I wrote my dissertation on fashion and architecture.
mm,
I was really interested in this, but I would love to read what she's writing, because I don't think I went anywhere near in depth as what you're describing with the
mm,
computational and the material and structural stuff like that. That's so interesting.
mm,
That's really cool. So it sounds like you've got quite a. You've interviewed so many people. You've had
mm,
quite a big range of the different ways that architecture intersects with different disciplines.
mm.
And is that something that you'll continue to be interested in? Like the way, you were talking
Yeah.
how you have all these different disciplines that you're able to go into.
Hmm.
Do you feel like you keep your mind open to all of those different things
Oh
as
yeah,
you're talking about, as you're writing, I guess, the different interviews that you're having?
definitely. I mean, I'm working on a feature at the moment about the curse. Do you see that what's, I think it's on Amazon Prime.
No.
Emma
What's,
Stone is in it. It's a really good series.
oh,
And what's his name? Who people are shouting at me right now. What's his name? The guy, Nathan. It's either Fielding or Fielder. I can't remember his name.
oh,
He was like the director of it. So I'm writing about that. So that's talking about culture,
mm,
media. Obviously, I've just done the AI series. I'm looking a lot about economic issues. Yeah, and then in my spare time, I might watch a thing about the ancient Mayans or something.
cool.
It's definitely, again, it just keeps life interesting.
Yeah.
Having this one degree, or this one career, and I guess too, because writing and architecture are both the same in that they, as I said earlier, they give you license to explore whatever you want. Going back to Richard Saul Wurman, he's published about 100 books throughout his life. Now he's almost 90, so he's had a lot of time to publish them, but still and you just look at the range of things he's written about. Obviously, there's architecture. He wrote the first ever book on Louis Kahn, and
Mm.
I think there's the anniversary edition of that just came out recently. A whole book of sketches from Louis Kahn. He wrote about that. He founded TED. He's written about he coined the entire field of information architecture, which some people might be aware of in the tech space.
Oh,
If
wow. Yeah.
not, they should look it up. He has come up with theories about. I mean, he has a theory called latch theory, which is that information can only be arranged in 5 ways, which I'm about to embarrass myself for not remembering. But I think it's
Go for it.
latch, which is, so it's location, alphabet. What's T? I think T is time. C is, I think, maybe color, and H is hierarchy. No, C is not color; it's something else. But anyway, people can look it up. So he's talked about information. He did a whole thing about medicine, mapping. He's looked at mapping ancient cultures. So he again, it's kept his life interesting, and it's also informed. I mean, he doesn't do as much designing now, but if you're a designer and an architect, even if you're still working in a regular commercial practice, your work is definitely going to be informed and is going to be propelled and will benefit from being exposed to as many different fields of interest as possible. There's a famous producer called Rick Rubin. He's worked with a huge amount of famous artists like Johnny Cash and others. He was on a podcast recently with a guy called Andrew Huberman, and he was talking about his creative process, and he calls it the seed collection process, where he basically just goes about his day, exposes himself to as many random thoughts and as many random subjects as possible. And he just kind of lets them collect in his mind, and he lets them kind of grow. He calls them seeds because they kind of then grow in his mind. And if he thinks there's something interesting about them, he might dwell on them for a certain project or dwell on others for other projects. So yeah, if you any sort of creative discipline will benefit from being as open and as kind of multimodal as possible, I think, whether that's architecture or music or writing or whatever.
I think you've just sold architecture as discipline. Everyone go and study architecture now.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you about the AI Archinect series that you did. Where do you see the future of architecture with AI tools now?
Well, again, this is only really my observations about what the future is. Part of what's interesting and also difficult about AI is we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know really what is Google actually working on. What is Meta and Microsoft? What are they working on behind the scenes that we just don't know about yet? What I will say in the design space, speaking to both large software companies like Autodesk and also smaller kind of startups, there's a massive emphasis on usability and prioritizing tools that are accessible to everyday designers and architects who don't have the time to train themselves massively on the intricacies of AI and machine learning or whatever. So I think there's definitely going to be a near future, and we're already seeing it, of a vast array of tools which are incredibly easy to use. It's not going to be like BIM, where you need like a BIM, or you should, or many do have like a BIM technician in their practice to fully leverage BIM and to get the most out of it. Because Revit, I use Revit. It can be a complicated tool if you don't know how to use it properly. I don't think we'll have the same with AI. I think rather than having like AI specialists embedded in practice as a way of using AI, you're going to have regular architects. The ones who will excel are the ones who just have their minds open to playing with various tools. And if a new tool comes on the market, they might spend a couple of minutes or a couple of days playing around with that and just being adept at knowing which tool to deploy in which context. Like even in Midjourney, there's different ways of editing and image generation. It's knowing what tool to reach for. There's an author, Randall Deutsch, who wrote a book called Super Users, and that's what he talked about. It's the idea of the super user, not the person who is not the person like he doesn't even know how to code probably, but they know that their mind is open enough to always be exploring new tools, and tools which are going to get easier and easier to use. So that's definitely one thing. In terms of the profession itself, there's a really good book, and it's not about architecture. It's called The Future of the Professions. It's by two professors from Oxford University here in the UK. I think they're father and son, Richard and Daniel Susskind, maybe they're brothers or something. But they talk about the future of the professions, and it's a huge book. It's like 600 pages, but they include architecture as one of the ones they talk about. And they kind of break the future of practice down into three parts, which I think are definitely applicable to AI, and they were kind of talking about AI. So you have one which is the kind of business as usual type of firm who might stay oblivious to AI, just kind of business as usual, taking on a more craft, human-centric, or not human-centric in the sense that the architecture isn't about humans, but a very manual approach to architecture that doesn't rely as much on technology. We all know those kind of architects. A lot of them are in academia, because I've seen a lot of them in my master's, people who kind of shun technology and even look down on students who who use it for, and there's
Sure.
reasons for that when you're in training, that you make sure you have an inner understanding, and you're not just kind of getting by flouting with tools. So that can be one branch. The economic outlook for that cohort, I don't know. I wouldn't bet on there being a massive market for architects who don't use AI to be able to keep up with those who do use AI. I think, actually, go back to your question about tools, the biggest refrain I've heard throughout the whole AI series was that AI won't replace architects. Architects using AI will replace architects who don't use AI. I think that probably came up in the panel discussion.
Yeah, I've heard that about art as well.
Yeah.
I've heard that about a bunch of different professions.
Yeah. So you have that first group who just go about as normal, thinking that the business will always be there, and for a certain amount of them it probably will be. Then you have a second group who will embrace AI on a surface level. So these are people who might talk about AI a lot in their marketing material. They might use Midjourney to generate some design ideas in practice for a client. They might use ChatGPT for various bits of research. They might have a couple of tools that help them with email. They might use AI in their writing or whatever. But AI won't fundamentally change the nature of their work. So these are firms who are still going to be doing the same stuff, but they're just going to be using AI in different parts of it. So it's not going to, their overall business model is not going to change. What's going to change is just the intricacies of AI supporting staff. And I suspect that certainly in the near term, I think will account or will describe a lot of firms who claim to be using AI. That's what they really mean. But then there's a third group, which is really interesting, and they're the ones who are just going to go all in. They're going to develop new tools themselves. There's a couple of examples of that in the AI series that we did. People who are actually seeing computation and AI as an opportunity to just imagine just entirely new business models. So it's not about a one-on-one architect-client relationship anymore, where it used to be. What if you can develop a tool that designs something for you, that the client interacts with that? Or what if you have this one software program which has about 100 different projects on the go at once, that they're all learning from each other? The architect is just there as a kind of like a pilot in an airplane. So and they're very much built from the ground up. Again, they're not just the end users of tools like what the second group might be. These are people who actually develop their own tools. And rather contradicting what I was saying earlier, they might have specialists in-house, which are like AI, software engineers, devs, all these different specialist trained careers or specialist individuals. So I think that those in particular, and people disagree on this, but I'm fairly adamant that that new generation of firms will be mostly young, and they'll be mostly startup. I think when you're at the scale of a large corporate firm, like some that I've seen, it can be very difficult to move a ship that big to an entirely new business model.
Yeah.
But I think you're going over the next few years. I think you're going to see a lot of younger or they could be older individuals as well, who just have very purposely kept themselves sharp in new technology, who are just going to come up with all new sorts of ways of design, new ways of selling their products. One of the big things from this book, Future of the Professions, they talked about the fact people don't want professions, they want products. So if you're an architect, you need to remember, people don't want you, they want a building. If there is a safer, more cost-effective, and more convenient way of delivering that building without your traditional model of practice, they're going to go with the new model. So that's definitely something worth remembering. I think this new cohort building from the ground up are going to go back to kind of a first principles approach, and I think over the next few years you'll see something very interesting there. And those are just my thoughts. There's definitely people in our series who have disagreed with that, or who have agreed, or whatever. All you can really do is speculate. But those are just my observations, some of them anyway.
Yeah, thanks for that. No, I think you're in a great position to speculate. That's kind of why I wanted to ask you that, because you spoke to so many different kinds, and I think I've probably met or spoke to or heard people talk in those two categories, actually. And I think that the last one interests me the most in terms of like changing the way of thinking. I don't know if you heard my interview with Brian Kelly, who is an architecture professor, and he's been teaching his students to use AI tools in the design process, which is so interesting because of like changing the way of thinking of design. So rather than replacing anything, he described it like if you have a group of 4 people, the AI tool is the 5th person in your group.
Right.
And like the ways of exploring design. So like, we can think of a bunch of different ways in which something could be done, and then an AI tool can sort of see hundreds more, and so why not explore these different, I feel like changing the way that you think about stuff, I think is also, I mean, I'm definitely at a point also in my experience of profession where new technology comes out all the time, and being aware of, especially like an architectural visualization, this is a big thing. In the archivist industry of, do we embrace the new technology? If you don't, you're going to be left behind. Which is something I've seen over and over again, and it just seems like kind of pertinent to jump on it. I guess lots of architects see AI with either excitement or trepidation. I mean, that was something I was going to ask you. Do you think there's 2 categories?
Yeah, I think excitement more than trepidation. I think that a lot of architects see AI not as a replacement, but as a collaborator. I think they see it as something that it makes both business sense, but also a sense from a kind of an excitement and intrigue point of view to get on board. To different levels. I mean, there's one architect I spoke with, Amanda Talbot, who is from Sydney, Australia. Her studio is called Studio Snoop. People might have seen them in the news over the past year. They've created what they're calling the world's first AI designer. His name is Tilly. It's a bit like a kind of a Siri for architecture, but they've given her like a persona and a voice and all of that. So she similar to kind of like a ChatGPT or a GPT-4, which has been trained on vast amount of data from the internet or whatever. Tilly has been trained on a vast amount of data from the practice. And so Talbot almost describes Tilly as the practice. So if you think about what a practice, or if you think about what like an architecture studio is, there's a lot of different definitions for it, because there's a legal sense, it's a limited company or whatever. It's its own business entity. It's also like a collection of people. That's also another way of describing a studio. You can also describe a studio as an ethos or an idea. Like different studios stand for different things, and Tilly for them has become this way of the studio speaking back to them, which is kind of cool. So she was saying that they'll run design ideas by Tilly, and Tilly will tell them whether or not this fits in with the studio's ethos, which is kind of cool. So
that's interesting.
It's fascinating. And there's a lot of really just cool and interesting ways that AI and computation can just enhance and open new avenues and new roads in the creative process. And I think most architects are creative people. They are people with great intrigue and curiosity. So any new technology like this that comes along is going to pique their interest. So I'd say a lot of people are excited. Again, that word collaborator is something that has come up a lot. There's a couple of people then on the extremes, both very, very concerned or very, very kind of dismissive of the whole thing. Some people who think that AI is just like a massive distraction from more pressing issues like climate. And then you've one or two I spoke to who think it's an existential threat to the profession. So, but I would say those were the minority of people. I think if the largest concern about AI that I heard throughout the series wasn't really to do with economics or job prospects or control. It was more to do with bias, inequality, the danger of AI encoding biases that already exist in the real world. These are human created
Yeah.
biases, but that AI could encode them to such a deep level that if we give AI more responsibility in the design process over decisions, that these biases could find themselves encoded in future designs. And there's something new about that, really. I mean, humans are very good at encoding biases in designs as
Yeah.
well. But there's a danger that, at least with humans, we're very, very aware of human error. We always are aware that it's just one person's opinion. AI is so abstract that there always is this danger of the all-knowing computer overlord, and that maybe we're not paying as much attention as we should to the dangers of bias. What I thought was kind of cool and interesting about the people who are concerned about bias, they themselves are engaging with AI and they are using AI to articulate those biases and those
Brilliant.
prejudices. Beth House is a good example of this. She uses computation to create garments that are reflections and commentaries on the male gaze in society, on female empowerment or disempowerment. So she uses technology as a warning about technology and surveillance, which is interesting. Others, Morshen Aliari, she's another artist who engages a lot with, she's also Iranian American. She engages a lot with questions of bias. She also uses art and fashion as ways of articulating that. And then, yeah, other people who've talked about from the African context, dangers over what the kind of Indiana Jones effect, where white Europeans or Americans feel the need or the privilege to overlay or to impose different their own versions of technologies on other continents, whether it's Africa or the Middle East, etc. But again, these people who I've spoken to have not just they've not just been voicing their concerns on paper or in articles or in videos or on social media. They are using their own creative skills to produce a commentary and to produce artistic works and design works that encode this message. And more often not, they use the technologies that they critique in order to do that. Which is there's something really kind of cool about
I love that.
And
I think that's maybe one of the best ways to get your message across, really, is like to use the art that people are paying attention to, because I feel like that's the thing that people will pay attention to.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I want to talk to you about the economy briefly. I know that many architecture studios are experiencing an economic downturn. Where do you think the architecture industry is at the moment? I mean, if you can comment on that.
Yeah, no, it's something that we obviously Archinect is. I know that we're like you're from the UK, I'm from Ireland, but most of my writing is related to the American context. So I guess a lot of my reflections are going to be kind of US centric, but I think they're applicable to the UK as well. Archinect, we've definitely been reporting on the increasing, you might say, economic difficulties that architecture firms are seeing. So the AIA, for people from the UK, that's basically America's equivalent of the RIBA, every month do a kind of a survey or a gauge on billings in architecture firm, how much money firms are taking in. They do this every month. It's called the Architecture Billings Index. And we report on that. For almost every month of 2023, that has dropped and dropped and dropped. Firms are taking in less and less money. I just wrote a piece today about another report from the AIA that says that the construction sector will weaken throughout 2024 and 2025. So on one end of the scale, you have design commissions, or money being paid for design commissions are taking a hit, and also you have architects more involved in construction will see less activity in the US over the next couple years. It is just worth noting that we talk about architecture, construction. These are massive sectors, so there is a tendency for us to talk in generalized terms. When you do dig into it, you see ups and downs depending on which sector you're involved in. So for construction, the manufacturing sector is expected to do fairly well over the next couple of years. Now that's down to the fact that a lot of federal government money through different, whether through the CHIPS Act or the Inflation Adjustment Act, have just released a lot of government money towards like semiconductors, towards EV. All of these technologies need factories. They need they need infrastructure to manufacture. So if you're an architecture or construction firm involved in that, you're doing fairly well. Same for institutional projects, say museums or well, institutions, I guess more universities, but also museums as well. Typologies that don't depend as much on loans or like private loans, but depend more on, say, maybe government money or on philanthropy, who are a little bit more insulated from the wider economy. They're doing better. And then even if you look like within a sector, so if you look at residential construction, which is something I was looking at the other day,
Yeah.
Residential construction overall throughout the year has kind of been flat, or throughout last year has been kind of flat, maybe slightly down.
Yeah.
But if you look in more depth about that, single family homes, like smaller homes, have done very well in 2023. But then if you look at projects that have like 5 or more residential units in the project, so you're really talking more here about property development, those fell off a cliff in 2023. So if you're a firm that depends a lot on residential projects of say $5 or $10 million or more, say 20 units, 30 units, whatever, in an urban site, you would have struggled the last couple of years, or the last say 6 months, and you might continue to struggle. But if you're an architecture firm that is more, say, a couple of people or maybe even a sole practitioner, you earn your money more through private commissions for houses, you're doing better. So you have all these different kind of microeconomies.
Yeah.
But as an overall assessment, it seems to be a challenging a challenging couple of months previous and a challenging couple of years ahead.
Yeah, that's an interesting summary. Thanks for sharing that. I feel like I guess it's a little bit difficult to then, after seeing statistics, to try and make guesses and assumptions about the reasons for it. It was probably a bit difficult. I know that the offices, so commercial space has really taken a hit because people are struggling to go back into the office or don't want to go back to the office, and work and lifestyle has changed quite a lot. And so whereas residential is different, and then hospitality is also maybe going up a little bit, but it's a bit hard to predict, I guess. I'm wondering if if you can make any predictions on that.
Predictions, no. That's maybe a bit flippant, but I think that the situation that we're seeing now is kind of a perfect storm of a lot of different factors. I was writing again. I just wrote about this today, just in like a news report about the reasons for the kind of dire forecasts that I just spelled out. Yeah. And most people will be aware of this. Interest rates in the US and in the UK have increased significantly over the past, say, 18 months. They've gone from near zero up to about 5%. So you have, lenders, regional banks are being more careful about who they lend to, because they need to make sure, well, will this person be able to afford a 5% interest rate? So they're being a bit more strict. And then you also have then property developers not wanting to, or who were maybe used or had factored in the idea of, say, a 1% interest on loans, are now dealing with, say, 5% interest. And then also there's murmurings that there actually might be cuts in interest rate in the US over the next year. So you have a lot of developers, I think, who are just kind of sitting on the fence. They recognize it's a very expensive time to borrow money for projects, and a lot of architectural work is dependent on loans from banks, from institutional investment. So you have developers just not willing to commission as many projects, which is obviously going to immediately hurt architects. And then you have inflation. Inflation is slightly down on what it used to be, but the cost of construction is still about 40% higher than what it was before the pandemic. So that's still something. That's one project cycle. That's something which is still, I think, taking time for developers and for contractors to kind of get their head around. And then you also have construction labor costs. There's a shortage of construction workers, so that's going up and up. And then you have wars, you have climate events, you have all these external factors feeding into an inflation and a cost landscape that, a bit like the interest rates, it's just unclear what the future is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a property developer and you want to commit millions of dollars to effectively a 50-year bet on returning your investment, you're going to be nervous at the moment, I think, about
Yeah.
commissioning those projects. So there's a higher risk, I think, to investing money right now in construction. And also, and you as you mentioned, they're also getting lower returns for their investment
Right.
because the value of office space has decreased about 15% in the past year. Even the value of apartments has decreased 12%. I mean, house prices in the US and in the UK are actually falling. They're still
Mm.
very, very unaffordable to a lot of people, but they are falling. And if you're a property developer, again, you're looking at that and you're saying, I'm having to put more money in for less for less of an outcome.
Yeah.
Um, and then but I think those are all things which I think are familiar to, if you're a developer or an economist or a bank who's been operating for, say, decades. Like that's just kind of part and parcel of economic waves. You know, they go up and down. You have inflation and deflation. You have booms and busts and all that. But as you mentioned with the hybrid working thing, what we have right now is all of these kind of typical economic headwinds that happen maybe once every 7 or 10 years are being combined with very, very exceptional circumstances, um, brought on by the pandemic and also by the
Mm-hmm.
political landscape. So, as you say, a lot of businesses right now are still operating on remote or hybrid work schedules, which means there's a less of a demand for new office space. There's more uncertainty about investing capital in new office spaces. And also, people have to remember during the pandemic, our spending habits changed a lot. You know, we spent
Yeah.
on online spending skyrocketed. Amazon made record profits, all at the expense of um, physical, kind of brick and mortar commercial units or retail units. So there's more of a question now over the demand for new retail. People's social habits changed. Maybe people still, even in Ireland, people aren't using bars as much as they used to. So again, this is kind of a new situation
Yeah.
for a lot of people. These are all, I mean, office jobs, housing, sorry, not housing, retail, commercial, hospitality. These are all things which tended to trend upwards. But now we've just been kind of thrown into this new landscape where they're not. And then you have to remember that we're in an election year at least in the
Yeah.
US, well, in the UK as well, but it's more pronounced in the US. And
Yeah.
if you leave all the controversies and divisions out of it for a moment between Trump and Biden, if you just look objectively at their policies, um, they're two very different visions for the future of the built environment, for the future of construction. So Biden's message is build back better. So that's all about kind of renewable energy and retrofitting, less reliance on maybe cars, more reliance on, say, public transport. So that brings with it downstream a whole new set of scenarios for what a construction industry might look like. And then you look at Trump, and one of his big slogans is "Drill, baby, drill." So he's harking back to more of an era, say, from the 80s or from the 90s, which didn't care maybe as much about emissions and which is more focused on quick raw profits. He's more of a protectionist when it comes to trade, so that has knock-on consequences for manufacturing and for materials and all that. So if you're a developer, you're faced with the US going in two very different directions. The outcome of that election could well have a large say on what we build, where things get built, what parts of the country things get built, what materials we build with, um, what are the different standards or regulations or lack of regulations that might adhere to what we build in a couple of years.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also a financial thing of what will be the nature of government support for construction in a year's time? Well,
Yeah.
as mentioned earlier about the manufacturing sector doing very well, or the manufacturing sector and construction doing well, a lot of that was down to decisions made at a federal level, a federal government level, that obviously are going to, those habits and those decisions are going to change depending on which ideology is in office. So again, if you package everything that I've just said over the past half hour together, you're left with a landscape where if you're a developer and you have millions of dollars, you're like, I would rather just sit this. I'd rather sit this out for a while. Because keep in mind, all these interest rates that are hitting people who are wanting to borrow, they're great if you have money in a savings account, and that interest rate is going up. So if you're a developer, you're just like, well, my money's not doing too badly in a bank account. I'm just gonna
build.
Yeah, I'm just gonna let things play out for a few months. Things might get better. So I think that's the kind of perfect storm we're in at the moment. And some outcomes are easier to predict than others. I mean, the election is difficult to predict. Interest rates probably will fall coming up to the election, so that will probably release what must be billions or maybe even trillions of dollars, which are kind of pent up, ready to be spent. Not too dissimilar from what we saw during the pandemic, where there was basically a year-long hiatus in construction. That led to a lot of kind of backed up capital that then got unleashed throughout 2022, and you had a lot of contractors couldn't keep up with the amount of demands from clients, and architecture firms couldn't keep up with the amount of just pent up activity that was just kind of unleashed. So we might see something similar in 2025. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, that insight is fantastic. It's really in depth. I can't wait to read your articles about it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. I wanted to ask you one more thing before we go.
Yep.
Do you have any advice for someone starting out in the architecture practice, or specifically in like the architecture writing editorial side?
Yeah, I think that I'm always very nervous about giving advice because I'm very conscious that like everyone's different. What works for me might not work for someone else, and there's other people who have avenues open to them that I didn't have. So like, who am I to give advice? What I will say, and I mentioned this at the beginning, one of the advantages I've definitely seen with how I've approached things was not choosing architecture or journalism exclusively and abandoning the other. I've kind of figured out that they play very well off each other. And I would say to resist or think twice about advice from people who say choose one over, if you have two interests, you need to choose one over the other, you need to double down on one thing. I don't think that's what the future of work is. I think people are going to have several careers. They're going to have several sub-careers within those careers. So I don't think I would not, if you're someone who is interested in both architecture and writing, I would not feel the need to choose between the two of them. I'm not the world's smartest person. I've still been able to make them both work. I think that what I've definitely found as well was, aside from it keeps my work interesting, being able to kind of do architecture and writing, it also means I very rarely make career decisions under financial pressure, because I have two streams of income that are always kind of supporting each other. And if I want to take a risk or make a change in one side of the career, I can just keep the other stable. It doesn't, I don't have to think about how am I going to pay the bills. There's a lot to be said for being able to make career decisions not under financial pressure. So again, you can make them like, am I interested in this or not? Is this a route which seems intriguing to me? You don't feel as though you have to commit to something or not do something because of money, which I think is a really, it's a very difficult spot to get to, and you need a lot of luck. It didn't happen. It didn't happen on purpose for me. I hadn't planned it, but it's just the way it worked out. But yeah, the biggest thing I would say, don't feel the need to choose between the two of them. Try your best to make them both work. But if you find those too much, fair enough. You can choose one, but don't immediately assume you have to choose between the two of them.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that's fantastic. And you're right, not everyone gives that kind of advice. And I see that you're making it work really well.
Yeah. Oh, I was always told the opposite. Even in my
Yeah,
master's, I was told you have to choose between design and
choose.
writing. It was like, well, no, no, I
Yeah.
don't. Maybe I will. Maybe I will in the future, but don't do it until you feel like you have to. Don't
Yeah.
feel as though there is an expectation on you to just choose one career path the way that there definitely probably was for the generations before us. We're in a totally new environment now.
New landscape of working, yeah, for sure.
Mm.
Well, so for everyone listening, you should definitely go and check out Niall's articles on Archinect, and also the previous ones on Arc Daily. If you just type in Niall Patrick Walsh, you can find them all.
Yep.
And I look forward to reading your future articles too. That'd be amazing. I'm going to put links in the notes here for anyone watching that online as well.
Sure.
Niall, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this insight. It's been amazing. I think there's like a whole book list, a whole reading list.
Oh, I have a reading list too.
Oh,
Yeah,
brilliant. Okay.
yeah, thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, it's been great having you here. Thank you so much.